Yesterday is the latest film from Danny Boyle, who had recently backed out of filming the 25th Bond film due to creative differences, and also reportedly to keep continuing his focus on getting this film out to the public. Yesterday follows a struggling musician by the name of Jack Malik, who is having a difficult time achieving his dream, which is to obviously make it big as a musical artist. And one day while he's riding home on his bicycle, there's a worldwide power outage, and in the middle of it he gets into an accident when he gets hit by a transit bus. And after he gets out of the hospital, he begins to notice that everyone around him does not remember who the Beatles are, or the multitude of classic, iconic songs that they've brought into the public conscious over the past few decades, even. And because of this, he decides to take advantage of the situation and begins claiming the songs as his own, and he begins to rise to fame because of these classic songs. I saw this movie a few days ago, and I wasn't able to get around to doing my portion of the video before I actually saw the movie, and in that one I would have just gone through about how much the Beatles have touched my life growing up. I mean, when I got my first iPod, that was actually mine, because before that point I basically had hand-me-downs from my sister. My first one was an iPod Nano, a black Nano, 5th edition, I believe, or 6th, but I'm pretty sure it's 5th. I didn't buy too many songs at that point. I was just, I was just burning CDs onto the iPod that we had around the house. And around this time was when the Beatles Rock Band came out. And I was only a minor Beatles fan. I knew about them, but I didn't go too far into them. But that game really changed everything for me. It gave me a chance to play through all these songs that I knew, songs that I never heard of, even songs that I didn't even know were theirs. Like, I don't know why for the longest time I didn't realize Yellow Submarine was theirs. And at this point, I think I was like 13, 14, give or take. But anyway, so I started listening to them more frequently, and one of my uncles on my dad's side actually sent me every album of theirs so I could burn the CDs onto my iPod, and after that, I listened to their music non-stop for months. In fact, the Beatles actually helped to shape the majority of my freshman year of high school because of how much I listened to them, and I even went out and bought this biography from Philip Norman, John Lennon, The Life. I really love this book. I got this one because John is personally my favorite Beatle, and since he and Paul McCartney were the main songwriters for their music, you know, if you're a Beatles fan, I highly recommend this book because, you know, it's especially if you'd like to see the small things in Lennon's life, especially, that helped inspire their songs. And also, I'm pretty sure that the author, I'm pretty sure Norman also wrote a book on the life of Paul McCartney. I haven't read that one yet, but I should actually go out and get it. But anyway, so the movie yesterday. For obvious reasons, this was one of my most anticipated movies of 2019 because I love the concept. I knew that I would love the music because, you know, it shaped my life in one way or another, and the trailers had been really good up to that point. And then I go into the movie and, well, before I actually get into my thoughts on the film, I do first want to remind those who have not subscribed to the channel to go ahead and do it right now. You know, it really helps support the channel, and also I want to throw out two disclaimers. For my normal disclaimer to the uninitiated, the way that I break down my thoughts and convey them is through a pro and con list. It helps me compartmentalize the good and the bad in my opinion, and while I try to keep the sections separate, if I can make a pro and a con work off of each other, or if they're intrinsically tied together, then I will take advantage of that. Also, one little extra disclaimer. I will be making this a spoiler-filled review, and it's for reasons that will be obvious later. So if you haven't seen the movie and you still want to, go ahead, just put this in your save for later category, and then you can come back and watch it after you watch the movie. Or if you don't care to see it either way, but you're still kind of curious about my thoughts, then go ahead and strap in because we'll be getting into it in a second. Anyway, there's all my disclaimers, warnings, reminder to subscribe, everything. Let's go ahead and get into my review on yesterday.
What happened?
Electricity flicked off all over the world.
Cheese! Yesterday,
Ellie bought you a present.
all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday.
When did you write that?
I didn't write it. Paul McCartney wrote it. The Beatles.
Who?
John, Paul, George and Ringo, the Beatles. Oh yeah, I'll tell you something. I wanna hold your hand.
Hi, we should talk. See, we pay and you write songs and then you make a ton of money.
Song title, Hey Dude.
Hey, dude, are you sure?
Hey dude.
It's so much better.
Do it.
Okay, so this will be a spoiler review, as I mentioned, because I really did not like this movie, and I have a few complaints that involve spoilers, so I thought it was best to just go ahead and get them all out of the way. And as usual, I will start with the pros. So easily my favorite part of the film was actually not the music, it was whenever Jack would mention something and everybody would be like, what? What is that? Like, the obvious ones involving the Beatles, you know, Lily James's character Ellie, you know, would question why Jack specifically said the age 64 when quoting the classic song When I'm 64. Moments like that, and I figured that it would just stay within the realm of, like, Beatles references that people didn't get. So imagine my surprise when things like Coca-Cola and cigarettes joined the fray of having been forgotten by society as a whole. I mean, I can kind of understand Coca-Cola, but cigarettes, really? Hell, even near the end, he references Harry Potter in excruciating detail. And even one of the biggest fandoms in history, biggest franchises in history, is missing. Of course, besides the mere absence of such things, life feels relatively the same. No really big changes, or at least none that are shown. The screenwriter, Richard Curtis, if I remember correctly, creates a world that is bereft of one of the most influential bands to ever exist. And yet he doesn't really succeed in delivering on this premise. The main question of the film is, how would life be different without the Beatles? And the answer that the screenplay gives is, well, despite the non-existence of bands like Oasis, and maybe some other bands that are never really mentioned, who were directly influenced by the Beatles, you know, their non-existence as well, there's not really much difference between these two worlds. You just have a surface-level exploration. Rather than exploring this intriguing premise of a modern world that is denied one of its most formative cultural influences, he shrinks it into an enabling plot device for another sweetly watchable rom-com, or at least watchable for some others. It was barely watchable for me and my wife. We were both insanely bored throughout this movie, save for a few moments that made us chuckle for a couple of seconds, which led to pacing issues throughout. It was just one of those movies that was so bloated in its just under 2-hour runtime that we didn't even go to see our following movie. We were going to see Jay Vermouche. I forgot how you pronounce his name, but we were going to see that movie, The Dead Don't Die. We didn't even go, we just went home afterwards, and I played Red Dead Redemption, and I felt fine. Himesh Patel does a fine job as Jack Malek, though I don't believe that there was much for him to go on in this role, because, you know, he's brought down by a terrible character. Jack is a very unlikable character who focuses more on himself than others, and even when he has a change of heart near the end, it feels too forced and formulaic to really matter to the audience. And for some reason, even when he admits to the world of his misdeed or misdeeds, even though you know, that sort of thing is a little too big to be considered a misdeed. Everyone just clapped simply because, oh, he released all the songs online for free and told a girl that he loved her. That must mean he's a really good guy. I really can't see people actually falling for this in, you know, outside of that familiar romantic comedy that the majority of this film is, but I don't know, I could be wrong. Lily James also does give a good performance as Ellie, the original manager of Jack, before she's replaced by somebody else, and the girl who has been crushing on him for over a decade. But really, there's not much to her character, except for the fact that she's been in love with Jack for 10 plus years, and for some reason never told him, but just waited and waited and waited, you know, that cliche character. She's not very fleshed out, so it rides on Lily James's performance, and luckily, I've never seen her give a bad performance. Of course, probably the biggest thing that people wonder about going into this movie is, how are the songs? I mean, well, they're all iconic songs. No extras, no lesser known ones, just greatest hits all the way through. And Patel does a really good job singing them. He's got a nice, somber, and kind of mellow sort of tenor voice. In some ways, it kind of reminded me of a younger Paul McCartney, not in the way it sounds, but just the style of the vocals and the energy that Patel brought to it. So I thought that that was a highlight. But the problem is that there doesn't really seem to be anything notable about these covers besides the fact that his voice is good. They all feel like they've gone through some kind of musical industry filter. Like, you know, they just feel like your standard new pop and rock songs. The heart was missing from these songs for me. Kate McKinnon is very out of place in this film, in the same way that her character is out of place. She plays Jack's manager once he begins to hit the big time, and she is easily the worst character in the movie, and McKinnon gives the worst performance in the film. Her character is this one-dimensional character whose primary focus is on making money and just standing around making weird faces. No, wait. Okay, no, that was more McKinnon's acting than anything. She tries to pull off this cartoonish character that is in a mostly dramatic and yet a bit of a comedic role as well, and instead it makes her stand out in the worst possible way. Now, shifting back to the director, I think Danny Boyle has made a good name for himself over the years, and I actually consider him to be a very good director who has that sort of style and voice that happens to shine through his work no matter what. And I've liked his films, I really have. I don't know if I'd have to look back and see if there's any that I really loved. I think maybe, I don't know, I've only seen Slumdog Millionaire once, so maybe I'll need to rewatch that and see. But anyway, we are given this new film where everything kind of looks and feels pedestrian, with scenes haphazardly edited together and distracting camera angles thrown in just for variety. I really can't tell if he was trying as much with this film, or if his style is let down by a lesser movie than he deserved. I honestly can't tell. And this is the part where I start converging the wannabe critic in me and the Beatles fan, because, and also just as a normal person, because this is the point where I'm going to start complaining about a lot of shit. So you would also think that maybe some things involving the Beatles being introduced today would either raise some eyebrows or maybe put people off. But unless the film makes fun of it, it really doesn't matter. There's one instance where Jack is playing in Russia, and he sings Back in the USSR, and he's acting like, I just wrote this and everything. And one person comments on how it's weird that somebody who wasn't even born when it was still the USSR would actually call it that in a brand new song, but it's for 6 seconds and it's forgotten about immediately after, so it really didn't matter. And then there's this instance where people are going over Jack's album ideas for his first album, and they say that the White Album is a little too inclusive, and again, that's part of a joke, and it's completely forgotten about afterwards. But when a man pushing 30 years old sings, well, she was just 17, and you know what I mean, no one bats an eyelash? That's kind of creepy. I have to complain about one small scene that was shown in the trailer real quick, and it's right in this spot because I couldn't really decide where to put this in the structure of how I do my pros and cons, so I feel like this is a okay place to put it, but you know that scene where Jack is being interviewed by James Corden, and Corden says there are like two men outside that are claiming that the songs are theirs, and he like invites them in, and all you see, the last part you see from that scene in the trailers is two men walking in, one with shoes, one without shoes, making it very obvious that it's supposed to be John and Paul. Well, that scene was pointless. They set it up normally. It doesn't feel like there's anything different with the scene. Then when it gets to the point where they start walking out, it starts playing some weird camera angles on just those shots, you know, the shot of the feet and Jack looking towards that direction, just looking disoriented. They start playing with the camera and editing tricks to make it seem like a nightmare that Jack has. But then right after it ends, Jack is just in the recording studio recording another song, and nothing's ever suggested if it was a dream, a nightmare, a daydream, or anything. Everything just starts back up. Why is this scene there? I don't fucking know. And maybe you think, with the Beatles having not existed, does that mean that they still lived and they just never came together as a band, or they were just wiped out from existence? Well, the film answers this by bringing in one of the band members and showing, like, an alternate life for them. And no, not Paul or Ringo, not either one of the two living ones who could have actually, you know, been fairly useful in the movie. No. They bring back John Lennon. They have someone portray John Lennon, of all people, living in a farmhouse in the middle of England, and everything about this felt wrong, not only because it felt like it was completely out of place, and, I don't know, instead of exploring how he got to that point, and what was different about this timeline, and maybe, you know, yeah, what changed in this new timeline where nobody knows his name, and just trying to explore it for like a couple of minutes, or even just throwing in something. Instead, the writer used this scene to reaffirm Jack's decision on either staying in the business and continuing to write off these songs as his own, or going the cliche rom-com route where he gives up everything for the girl. As a last complaint for me personally, I have to touch on the ending where Jack has left the business and ran off with Ellie, because in a way, we kind of saw this coming, but not really. I did, but didn't. I'll explain a little bit later. But when we got to the point where Jack got in the accident, and that really kicked off the premise of yesterday, I leaned over to my wife and I said, okay, I know this ending. It's going to be the cliche, wake up from a fantastical dream and fix everything wrong in your life. I thought it was going to be that. I thought it was going to end like the rom-com that I saw earlier this year, Isn't It Romantic, that movie. But instead of doing something, you know, kind of expected, it goes for the unexpected. It just kept going with it. It kept going with everything. It just went where they left, and they stayed in a world where nobody knew about the Beatles. It just, I don't know. No explanation why the world ended up like this or anything. There are no questions asked with hardly anything, which is another issue with this movie. Our main character doesn't explore or question the status quo of everything. Hell, even in Groundhog Day, if I remember correctly, the movie with Bill Murray, even in that, after a little bit, he went to a shrink to figure out what the fuck is going on. That's kind of smart. If you can't figure it out yourself, maybe go to somebody who can try to figure it out, figure out your mental state. But anyway, I'm rambling a bit. After seeing the true ending of yesterday, I would have actually preferred the cliche ending. If anything, it would have fixed a few issues with the movie that I had, mainly with the jumps in logic, but because we got the ending, it opened up the film to even more criticism. And those are my thoughts on yesterday. As you can see, I really, really did not like this movie. While the two leads, Himesh Patel and Lily James, gave good performances, and honestly, I will say their chemistry was pretty good. And just the way that the story played with certain ideas was fun and interesting. The film had a lack of heart and fun in itself. There were too many stereotypes, logic issues, and just cliches to make the movie memorable. And even when it needed a cliche, it didn't even do it. It just, I don't know. This movie is not memorable except as a film that came on the heels of Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman that was trying to, like those films, instill a sort of nostalgia for people who love the subject's music without actually putting in any work compared to the other two. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Bohemian Rhapsody as a whole, but I will admit that it's a better made movie than Yesterday, and Rocketman's still one of my favorite movies of this year, so I'm not even going to compare it to this drivel. I know that I'm in the minority with this. Most critics liked it enough, and audiences seem to love this, so maybe if you go out and see it, you will love it or like it too. I can't fully recommend a movie that I didn't like or felt like I didn't really get anything out of it in the long run. Although, the only thing that I did get out of it was finally knowing that my wife was very unfamiliar with the Beatles as a whole, aside from a couple of songs, which is weird because I should have known this about her. But anyway, it gives me a chance to introduce her to something, to introduce her to another thing that I grew up with, and because I haven't listened to the Beatles in a long while, it'll help me rekindle my love for them, and really, all in all, I guess that's not a bad thing after all. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't hesitate to hit that like button, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so that you can keep up to date with everything that's going on the channel. I already told you guys that earlier. God damn it. Also, don't forget to keep the conversation going down below. Just talk about anything that I mentioned in this video. You know, debate with me, anything. I just really love hearing what you guys think about the movies and topics that I bring up, and I'd like to have, like, a conversation with all of you guys about them, if I can. But anyway, I think that's all. Other than... I can't speak today. Other than to just say farewell until the next video, all you casual moviegoers and movie fans alike, and keep on being awesome.